Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Forge of Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Alex Uli, and this is the first episode of the Forge of Freedom. Thank you for tuning in, and if you like what you hear, please like and subscribe. This podcast is available on all your most popular podcast streaming sources, as well as YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey. I'm going to keep the first episode relatively short. I just want to take some time to introduce myself and discuss the vision for the podcast. So to start out, again, my name is Alex Uli. I'm an attorney and a firearms instructor, and I live in Indiana with my wife and our dog, Millie. I've been a practicing attorney for a little over 5 years, primarily in the area of criminal defense and self-defense. My family and I also run a firearms training business. My father, Mike, is also an attorney, and we teach a 5-hour seminar on the legal concepts we think people need to understand when owning and carrying a firearm. I'm also a regular guest on the Bullet podcast with Paul Lathrop from the Second Amendment Foundation. That's a podcast. It's actually a daily podcast through the week, Monday through Friday, and an hour-long podcast on Saturdays. I'm typically on the show every other Friday, and we talk about current events related to the Second Amendment and firearms, typically from a legal perspective when I'm the guest. And then occasionally I'm a guest on Saturdays as well for the weekend edition of the Bullet. It's a great show. If it's something you have an interest in, more firearms focused, definitely check that out. It's the Second Amendment Foundation. It's on Facebook, YouTube, and on most of your podcast sources. As you can see, my background is pretty heavy in law and in firearms, but my passion isn't just firearms. My passion is really freedom and liberty, and I use those words interchangeably or synonymously. But I'm really interested in spreading the ideas of freedom and personal responsibility to others, and that's really the goal of this podcast. My hope is to help people find freedom in a world that seems less and less free. The idea behind the name of the podcast, The Forge of Freedom, is that freedom is found through personal responsibility, not through government. You, the individual, are the forge of freedom, and together we can learn from each other and create more freedom for our own sake, for the ones we love, and for future generations. I looked up the definition of forge on Merriam-Webster, and it says forge means to form or bring into being, especially by an expenditure of effort. And I chose this word because I think it captures the fact that we are not born into a state of freedom. We are born into a world full of bondage and oppression, and we must forge freedom through relentless effort and faith and personal responsibility. Freedom is something that must be earned, and it starts with you, the individual. At the Phoenix Chamber of Commerce in 1961, Ronald Reagan said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day, we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States when men were free." At the Forge of Freedom, we believe freedom is not given to us by government. Rather, freedom is forged through personal responsibility and continued vigilance. So often people look to government to impose their will on others, and through this passive-aggressive system of government, society incrementally becomes less free by enslaving their fellow citizens. In a world that is increasingly less free, you are the forge of freedom. And we hope that this podcast and the community that forms around it can serve as an educational source for ideas and inspiration to forge more freedom in your life. We hope to develop a community of freedom-minded, liberty-loving people who can learn from each other and create freedom in an unfree world. Your actions affect your life and the lives of those around you, and we hope that you can positively affect the world through your actions. If you live a life of liberty and others notice, the fire for freedom may carry on for generations to come. Next week, my plan is to discuss why freedom. And basically, the answer is that freedom is the only human condition that is virtuous, or where humans can act virtuously. If an action is coerced or forced, there is no virtue in that action. It has to be a freely chosen action to be virtuous. And freedom is the only condition absent coercion and slavery. And in a worldview that embraces freedom as the greatest civic virtue, the greatest political virtue, there would be no coercion or slavery. The idea stems from this concept called the non-aggression principle, which we'll get into in more detail. But basically, the idea is don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. It's really that simple. And we can never be completely free, but the goal is to maximize freedom. And I think we have to do that through personal responsibility, like I've touched on a number of times already, but also through education and helping others. So if this sounds appealing to you, tune in next week. Tune in for future episodes. Like and subscribe to the podcast. We'll have content about all topics freedom related, ranging from gardening and firearms training to philosophy, preparedness, and lifestyle design. I anticipate releasing one episode per week. And like I said, in our next episode, the plan is to discuss why freedom. I'll also occasionally have a guest on the show to talk about various topics, ranging, again, from all things related to freedom. In these episodes where it's just me talking, and they will be shorter episodes, but I'll try to keep most episodes to less than a half hour. I'm excited to start this adventure with all of you. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to forging freedom.